The silence of my apartment was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from the absence of her laughter. 6 months, and the hollow echo of her name still reverberated in the spaces where her voice used to be. Every morning, the scent of her perfume, faint and ghostly, clung to the fabric of the sofa, a cruel reminder of a life that had simply ceased. My hands, once steady, now trembled as I traced the edge of a photograph on the mantelpiece. Her smile frozen in time, eternally vibrant, eternally out of reach. My chest felt tight, a constant dull ache beneath my ribs, a perpetual knot of grief. I couldn't breathe here anymore. This city, this apartment, it was a mausoleum of memories, each one a shard of glass in my throat. Then the letter arrived, crisp and formal, from the solicitor. My grandmother. Estranged, distant, a name whispered in hushed tones during my childhood, now a conduit to something new. Her will, a remote manor, miles from anywhere, deep in the forgotten stretch of the countryside. A fresh start, the solicitor had said with practiced sympathy, a chance to clear my head. I didn't believe in fresh starts, not really, but the thought of escaping this urban tomb, this suffocating familiarity, was a desperate primal urge. I needed to breathe air that hadn't been filtered through the ghost of her memory. I packed a single bag, not bothering with goodbyes. There was no one left to say them to. The drive was long, the landscape slowly shedding the harsh edges of urban sprawl for the softer, greener curves of rolling hills and dense, ancient forests. Rain began to fall, a steady, rhythmic drumming against the windshield, blurring the world outside into an impressionistic smear of greens and grays. My jaw ached from clenching it, a habit I hadn't managed to break since the funeral. My shoulders were tight, a perpetual brace against a blow that had already landed. The GPS signal wavered, then died, leaving me to navigate by instinct and the increasingly faded directions scribbled on a napkin. I rounded a bend, the car's tires hissing on the wet asphalt, and the world outside the window lurched into a sudden, unexpected vista, a closed amusement park. Rust-streaked steel rose like skeletal giants against the bruised sky. It was utterly deserted, a graveyard of forgotten joy. A pre-season inspection, the sign declared, though no one was visible. The Ferris wheel, painted in faded primary colors, stood motionless, its empty gondolas swaying with a mournful, almost imperceptible creak in the wind. A roller coaster track, a tangled knot of metal, stretched upwards, reaching for the low-hanging clouds, its worn-out carts parked haphazardly at the base. They sounded like tired, ancient beasts, stirring in their slumber. Why was it making those noises, alone in the rain? My hands tightened on the steering wheel, gripped tight. I pulled over, unable to tear my eyes from the desolate scene. The carousel, its painted horses chipped and peeling, was partially obscured by overgrown bushes, their vacant eyes staring out at nothing. A single tattered banner, advertising a summer festival from years past, flapped weakly in the breeze, a pathetic echo of gaiety. It felt like a memory, a childhood dream, twisted into something grotesque and abandoned. I had to get away from it. It was larger than I'd imagined, a hulking Victorian silhouette against the bruised purple sky. The driveway, once grand, was now a gravel track choked with weeds, leading to a crumbling stone archway. A wrought iron gate, rusted open, sagged mournfully on its hinges, its intricate scrollwork devoured by the encroaching rust. My grandmother's home, my new home. I killed the engine, and the sudden quiet was absolute, broken only by the distant murmur of the wind through the tall, skeletal trees surrounding the property. The air here was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something cloying and sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. The house itself seemed to breathe, a low, groaning sigh that resonated through the still air. I felt watched, though the only visible movement was the sway of the ivy tendrils against the brickwork, like grasping fingers. The air inside was stale, dead, tasting of mildew and forgotten things, coating my tongue with a dry, metallic film. Dust motes danced in the single weak beam of my flashlight, tiny, frantic spirits in the gloom. I fumbled for the light switch I'd been told was near the door. Nothing. I stood there, paralyzed for a moment, the weight of the house pressing down on me. My flashlight beam cut through the blackness, revealing a grand, decaying space. Cobwebs, thick and heavy as old lace, draped from the chandelier, obscuring its crystal gleam. The floorboards beneath my feet creaked, protesting my weight, and the sound echoed, stretched, twisted, as if the house itself was groaning. Every breath I took felt shallow, strained. What other echoes resided within these walls? The silence of the manor swallowed me whole, a vast, echoing space that made my own breathing sound impossibly loud. My grandmother's house. I traced the peeling wallpaper with a finger. The floral pattern faded into a ghostly suggestion of its former vibrancy. Dust motes danced in the anemic light filtering through the grimy panes, each speck a tiny, forgotten universe. The air itself tasted stale, heavy with the scent of dried roses and something else, something metallic and faintly damp, like old coins found in wet earth. I started in the drawing room, a mausoleum of velvet-draped furniture and shrouded mirrors. Each object I uncovered felt like an archaeological find. A set of ivory dominoes, their smooth surfaces yellowed with age, lay scattered on a card table. Beneath a stack of brittle newspapers, I found a small, tarnished silver locket. It was cold to the touch, and when I pried it open, too blurry. Sepia faces stared back, a stern-faced woman and a man whose eyes seemed to follow me even in the faded image. Neither was familiar. I felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being watched by these silent witnesses. As I moved deeper into the house, the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, a symphony of complaint. The grand staircase, its banister carved with intricate, twisting vines, ascended into a gloom that promised only more forgotten corners. In a small study, lined with books that smelled of mildew and neglected leather, I found a collection of old photographs. They were tucked into a leather-bound album, pages brittle, edges crumbling. There were pictures of my grandmother, younger, her face etched with a severity I recognized, but also a strange, almost manic glint in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Other faces, unnamed, stared out from the past, men and women with oddly uniform expressions, a distant, almost vacant look. I paused at one image, a family picnic, a sprawling estate in the background. My grandmother, a young girl then, stood apart from the others, her hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on something just beyond the frame. Just the old wiring, I told myself, a shrug of dismissal. The house was a relic. A sudden, sharp clang ripped through the quiet. My breath hitched. It was the sound of metal on metal, a distant, rhythmic groan. Then another, a high-pitched squeal like rusted gears grinding against each other. The smell of popcorn and damp concrete, a strange, sweet decay, flooded my senses. I was no longer in the musty study. I was standing in a vast open space, the air thick with salt and something sweet, sickly. Towering skeletons of roller coasters clawed at a bruised sky, their tracks silent but somehow alive. The Ferris wheel, a colossal rusted eye, stood motionless, yet I could hear the faint, mocking creak of its gondolas swaying in a breeze that didn't touch me. The ground beneath my feet was cracked asphalt, littered with forgotten tickets and faded candy wrappers. I could almost feel the vibration of the ground, the distant roar of a phantom crowd. This was a closed amusement park, pre-season inspection, rides creaking, but it was impassable. My vision swam. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands into them until stars exploded behind my eyelids. When I opened them again, the study was back, the books, the dust, the scent of mildew, grief, I thought, stress. My mind playing tricks, conjuring phantom landscapes from some forgotten dream or half-remembered news report. It was the trauma, surely, the 6 months of an absence that still felt like a physical weight in my chest. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to push the image of the creaking rides from my thoughts. The kitchen was a nightmare of ancient appliances and cobwebbed pantries. The dining room, a long, imposing space, held a table set for a feast that would never come, shrouded in a sheet that billowed almost imperceptibly as I passed. I found myself drawn to a narrow hallway I hadn't noticed before, tucked behind the kitchen. The floorboards here didn't creak. They felt solid, unyielding. At the end of the hall, I discovered a small, windowless room. The air inside was thick, stagnant, as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The only light came from a single, grimy window high on the wall, barely illuminating the space. Its surface was scarred and scratched, adorned with intricate, almost alien carvings that seemed to writhe and intertwine. A thick, rusted padlock secured the lid, its iron jaws clamped tight. It wasn't a word, not exactly, more like a breath. A fleeting suggestion of sound, too soft to decipher, too close to ignore. It felt like it came from inside my own head or from the very air around me. My skin prickled. I spun around, but the empty room offered no explanation. Just the chest. What was locked inside that chest? Dust motes danced in the anemic light, a slow, eternal ballet in the stagnant air. I knew I needed to start sorting, to impose some order on the chaos, but the sheer weight of the house, of the memories, kept me rooted. Then a whisper, faint like silk rustling against old wood, my name. William. It was barely there, a ghost of a sound, yet it pulled at something deep inside me. I spun, my eyes raking the long, empty corridor. Nothing. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the quiet. I told myself it was the wind, perhaps the old pipes, my mind playing tricks in the wake of such profound loss. Grief could conjure anything, I knew. It was just grief, lilacs, my wife's favorite perfume. It was strong, distinct, a sudden jarring bloom in the musty air of the study. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea twisting through me, and for a fleeting second I saw her, standing by the dusty bookshelves, her smile soft, her eyes warm. The image dissolved before I could fully grasp it, leaving only the sharp tang of lilacs that faded as quickly as it had appeared. My hands trembled. This was too vivid, too real. My rational mind wrestled with the sensory memory, trying to attribute it to some lingering sachet, some forgotten garment. But the house had been empty for years. How could the scent be so fresh, so potent? I needed to hear a familiar voice, a voice that belonged to the world outside these walls. I fumbled for my phone, the cold metal a small comfort against my clammy palm. I dialed the old friend, the one who always had a logical explanation for everything. His voice, when he finally answered, was a distant, crackling reassurance. I kept it vague, stripped of the raw edges of my fear. "You're just, William, you've been through a lot," the old friend said, his tone sympathetic but laced with a clear impatience. "It's the isolation, the grief. You need to get out, see some people, come back to the city." He suggested I was imagining things, that the old house was probably just settling, playing tricks on my overactive imagination. He meant well. I knew, but his words felt like a fresh layer of insulation, sealing me further into my own fractured reality. He didn't understand. How could he? Was he right? Was I truly losing my grip? The next day, a desperate need for fresh air, for anything that didn't smell of dust and decay, pulled me from the manor. I drove aimlessly, the landscape blurring outside the window, until I found myself on a forgotten road leading to the coast. There it was, a closed amusement park, pre-season inspection, rides creaking. The gates were chained, a rusting sentinel against the gray sky. It was exactly the kind of desolate place that matched the landscape of my mind. The air here was sharp with the tang of salt and decay, a metallic undercurrent I couldn't place. The rides stood like skeletal giants, their faded paint peeling, their mechanisms exposed to the elements. The Ferris wheel, a colossal, rusted spiderweb, groaned in the wind, its empty gondolas swaying with a slow, mournful rhythm. The roller coaster tracks snaked into the sky, a twisted metal spine against the bruised clouds. The very ground felt uneven beneath my feet, patches of asphalt giving way to damp earth. I stopped beneath the carousel, its once vibrant horses frozen mid-gallop, their painted eyes staring vacantly into the gloom. A single, broken mirror on its central column reflected my distorted face, a gaunt stranger with haunted eyes. A music box tune, tinny and sweet, but profoundly off-key like a broken childhood memory. My heart seized. It was our song, the one we danced to at our wedding. My breath hitched. I knew there was no power here, no mechanism for such a thing to play. My eyes darted around, searching for the source, for any sign of another presence. The melody swelled, a distorted echo of happiness, twisting into something grotesque, a mocking lullaby. I saw her then, a flicker at the edge of my vision, reflected in the broken carousel mirror. Her hand, translucent, seemed to reach out, her fingers long and too thin, brushing against the cold glass. The reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was her, but wrong, her smile too wide, her eyes like sunken pools. My skin prickled, aware. The reflection in the mirror was just my own terrified face again, pale and sweat-slicked. I ran. I didn't look back. Scrambling through the broken fence, my lungs burning, the salt and rust of the park clinging to my clothes, to my very skin. My old friend had been wrong. This wasn't just grief. This was something else. Dust motes danced in the anemic light, the only movement in a room that felt utterly still, utterly dead. Grief still clung to me, a shroud that distorted the edges of reality, but beneath it, a new feeling had begun to fester, a cold, insistent curiosity. This house held more than just memories. The mantelpiece above it was carved with ornate, almost grotesque figures, their faces twisted into silent screams. It was solid, unyielding, yet something about its texture felt wrong, a subtle unevenness. My fingers probed, searching, testing. Behind one of the contorted faces, where a stone eye should have been, there was a faint seam. Not a crack, but a deliberate line, almost invisible to the casual glance. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a sudden, frantic drumbeat. I pressed harder, the stone shifting with a soft, grinding sigh. A section of the mantelpiece, no larger than my hand, swung inward with a faint, rusty squeal. Behind it a cavity, musty, my breath caught in my throat. I reached inside, my fingertips brushing against something brittle, papery. A small, leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age, and a single, yellowed photograph tucked inside. The air that rushed out of the compartment was stale, thick with the scent of aged paper and something else, something vaguely metallic like old blood. My heart thumped, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. What had I found? I pulled the items out, my hands trembling. The photograph showed my grandmother, younger, her eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't quite place, fear, perhaps, or a desperate kind of resolve. She stood in front of what looked like a carousel, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop. The book was a journal, its pages brittle, filled with a spidery, elegant script that I recognized as hers. I hear them even when I cover my ears. They promise something terrible, something from before. My eyes darted to another page later. The pact. It always comes back to the pact. My mother, her mother, the pact. This wasn't just a haunting. This was something woven into the very fabric of my family. I needed to think, to breathe. The house felt too close, too heavy with her secrets. The photograph of my grandmother and the carousel nagged at me, an insistent tug. I remembered vaguely from childhood a day trip, a distant, forgotten place. I needed to see that carousel. The drive was a blur, the old journal clutched tight in my grip. I found it eventually, a neglected landmark on the outskirts of town, a closed amusement park, pre-season inspection, rides creaking. The entrance gate was chained, rusted, but a gap in the fence, worn smooth by trespassers, offered an invitation. A skeletal Ferris wheel loomed against the bruised sky, its empty gondolas swaying with an almost imperceptible groan. My boots crunched on scattered gravel and dead leaves as I walked deeper into the park. Then the sounds began. A high-pitched squeal from the tilt-a-whirl, a long, drawn-out sigh from the roller coaster's tracks, like a giant taking a slow, pained breath. The rides creaking weren't just the wind. They had a rhythm, a cadence that felt almost deliberate. I passed the remains of Popcorn's stand, its canvas ripped, leaving a faint, sickly sweet scent of stale sugar and dust. I found the carousel, just as in the photograph, its vibrant paint faded to pastel ghosts. The horses, once majestic, were chipped and peeling, their glass eyes staring blankly. It wasn't words, not yet, but a low, guttural murmur. A chorus of hushed voices that seemed to resonate with the creaking of the rides, with the very air. There was this, the sound of the pact calling. What did this place have to do with her? With the pact, with these impossible sounds that chased me even here? The photograph of my grandmother, her eyes holding a glint I now recognized as something far older than age, had been too much. The weight of the house, the stench of dust and forgotten lives, pressed in on me, suffocating. I needed air. I needed distance, not from the truth perhaps, but from the immediate, tangible presence of her secrets. My car keys felt like a lifeline, a desperate grasp at normalcy. I drove without a destination in mind, the engines hum a dull balm against the frantic beat of my pulse, until the faded, rusted sign loomed through the drizzle, the old amusement park. It was closed for the season, of course, undergoing its pre-season inspection, rides creaking. Air here was different, carrying the damp scent of decay and stale popcorn, an odd mix of childhood joy and forgotten despair. I parked the car, the crunch of gravel under the tires unnaturally loud in the quiet. The entrance gate was ajar, a silent invitation, or perhaps a trap. I pushed through, the metal groaning a rusty protest. The sky was a bruised purple, mirroring the desolation around me. Towering roller coasters stood like skeletal giants against the horizon, their tracks weaving intricate, terrifying patterns into the low clouds. A carousel, stripped of its vibrant paint, horses frozen mid-gallop, looked less like a ride and more like a macabre monument. The wind whistled through the empty concession stands, carrying a faint, sweet smell, like cotton candy left to rot. I walked, my boots scuffing on cracked asphalt, the only sound apart from the omnipresent ride's creaking. It was a symphony of groans and metallic sighs, each one a phantom breath in the skeletal park. I could almost hear the laughter of children, the tinny music of the games, but it was just the wind playing tricks on my ears, or was it? A shiver traced its way up my spine, not from the cold, but from a deeper, more insidious chill. I clutched the faded photograph in my pocket, its edges sharp against my palm. The pact, the whispers. It all felt like a fever dream, too impossible to be real, yet too terrifying to ignore. My mind raced, trying to find logic in the madness, to fit the pieces together. Then I heard it. It was a familiar cadence, a lilt that made my breath catch in my throat. William, my name spoken with a tenderness that tore at something deep inside me. It wasn't possible. He was gone. I spun around, my eyes scanning the desolate landscape, the empty paths, the silent rides. Nothing. Just the closed amusement park pre-season inspection. Rides creaking and the gathering gloom. The air grew heavy, thick with something like ozone and the faint, sweet perfume she used to wear. My hands trembled. One of the faded horses, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, seemed to glow from within. I took a hesitant step, then another, drawn by an invisible thread. The scent of her perfume grew stronger, almost cloying now, mingling with the metallic tang of fear that coated my tongue. The creaking of the rides intensified, becoming less random and more rhythmic, like a distorted mechanical heartbeat. As I neared the carousel, the light pulsed, illuminating a figure seated on one of the horses. Her hair, the exact shade of auburn I remembered, cascaded over her shoulders. Her dress, the floral pattern she loved, shimmered in the dim light. It was her. My legs felt like lead rooted to the spot. Her head slowly turned. A grotesque smile stretched her lips, too wide, too sharp, revealing teeth that were too many, too pointed. The floral dress seemed to writhe, the patterns shifting, blooming into thorny vines that snaked around her, digging into her flesh, yet she didn't flinch. With a violent, jarring shudder that made the metal shriek. The phantom music began, a garbled, discordant tune that clawed at my ears, a twisted lullaby of grief. The other horses, previously still, began to writhe on their poles, their painted eyes seeming to follow my every move. The air grew frigid, sinking into my marrow, stealing my breath. This wasn't her. This was a perversion, a grotesque echo. A single bloody tear traced a path down her cheek, leaving a glistening trail on her pale skin. It was a tear of malice, not sorrow. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea twisting through me. My mind screamed for me to run, but my body was frozen, mesmerized by the horrifying tableau. The figure on the carousel pulsed with an awful, malevolent energy, its eyes boring into me, stripping me bare, seeing every raw wound of my loss. It was feeding on it, thriving on it. The knowledge hit me with the force of a physical blow. This thing knew me, knew my pain, and was using it as a weapon. It wasn't just a haunting in the house. It was a hunter, and I was its prey, lured out into the open. The world blurred around the edges, the distinction between reality and nightmare dissolving into a sickening swirl of fear and despair. Music died, the carousel stood still, and the ride's creaking resumed its mournful song. The scent of her perfume vanished, replaced by the damp decay of the park. What did it want from me, this entity that wore the face of my beloved? And how could I ever escape something that knew my heart so intimately? The shriek of metal still echoed in my skull, a phantom resonance that vibrated behind my eyes. I could almost taste the dust and damp air from the closed amusement park. Pre-season inspection, rides creaking. The image of the carousel horses, their painted eyes wide and unseeing, writhing on their posts, was burned into my mind. I had fled, stumbling through the decaying gates, my breath tearing in my throat, not daring to look back at the discordant music that chased me. Now, back in the manor, the silence felt heavy, a suffocating blanket woven with the threads of that terror. My hands trembled as I pushed open the heavy oak door to my grandmother's study. The room was a mausoleum of forgotten knowledge, filled with the scent of aged paper and dust, a faint, sweet decay that clung to the velvet drapes. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak morning light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating stacks of books and yellowed documents. This was where the answers had to be, tucked away in the shadows, waiting for me to be brave enough to uncover them. A pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet. I started methodically, pulling down heavy tomes from sagging shelves, their leather bindings cracked and dry beneath my fingers. Local histories, folklore collections, even a few obscure texts on forgotten rituals. The air was thick, each inhale a dry rasp in my lungs. Then I found it. Tucked within a brittle, leather-bound journal, a pressed, faded wildflower marked a page. The handwriting, my grandmother's, was elegant but spidery, charting a family tree. My breath hitched. The journal dropped from my grasp, thudding softly on the Persian rug, scattering dust. Ice flooded my veins. My hands shook as I picked it up again, forcing myself to read. The entries weren't explicit, but the implication was clear. A history of vanishing acts, of minds unraveling. My own father had always been distant, withdrawn. What had happened to Elias? I pushed the journal aside, my gaze falling upon a thick, unlabeled scrapbook. Inside, newspaper clippings, many brittle and flaking, detailed local events from decades past. One headline screamed, "Local farmer found wandering amnesiac." Another, "Child disappears from wooded path, no trace." Below it, a handwritten note in my grandmother's script. The chorale. A metallic taste coated my tongue, the raw tang of fear. I flipped more pages, faster now. A desperate hunt for understanding. A grainy photograph of a wooded area, familiar, unsettling. The woods surrounding this house. The echo thief. It spoke of a presence that dwelt in the ancient trees, that fed on sorrow and the fragile threads of memory. It could twist perceptions and lure the lost into its embrace. The article ended with a warning, a local superstition about never speaking its name aloud lest it hear. The words blurred. My eyes burned. The air in the study felt suddenly thin, stifling. Was it just a legend, a folk tale, or was it a description, a terrifyingly accurate blueprint of what was happening to me? The carousel's screech tore through my thoughts again, the scent of damp wood and something metallic, like old blood, filling my nostrils. The horses writhed. The music clawed. It was too real, all of it. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my palms against them, trying to banish the images, to make sense of the overwhelming flood of information. Disappearances, madness, a thing in the woods, taking memories, my family, my grief. The connections were forming, tightening around me like a noose. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was monstrous. What if the legend wasn't just a story, but a warning passed down through generations, ignored until it was too late? The image of the carousel horses, their painted eyes wide and unseeing, writhing on their pedestals, their painted smiles stretched into grimaces. The vision clung, a greasy film over my perception, even as my hands pressed against the cold, familiar wood of the manor's study doorframe. I blinked hard, trying to dislodge the image. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the house. I took a breath, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and something else, something cloying and sweet, like wilting flowers. My head throbbed. I'd been here, hadn't I? In the study, searching through my grandmother's journals. Had I drifted off? The memory of the amusement park felt too vivid, too real to be a dream, yet the sudden jolt of waking suggested otherwise. My fingers, still tingling from the phantom vibration, traced the grain of the wood. The house was quiet, too quiet. The usual symphony of groans and creaks, the settling of old timber, was absent. I pushed off the doorframe, intending to check the hallway. Perhaps get a glass of water. The floorboards beneath my boots felt strangely uneven, as if the very foundations had shifted in the brief time I'd been lost in that vision. I took a step, then another, moving towards the main staircase. The single sconce light, usually a dull amber glow, was out. I reached for the switch, flicking it up and down. Nothing. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, making each breath a conscious effort. I continued, my hand brushing against the wall, feeling the rough texture of the ancient wallpaper. Then a sharp, metallic tang filled my nostrils, cutting through the scent of dust and old flowers. It was the same smell I'd encountered at the park, coppery and sharp, like old blood mixed with ozone. I stopped dead. No clock, no alcove, just a seamless, impenetrable barrier. My eyes darted around, searching for a landmark, something to confirm my bearings. I walked back, retracing my steps, my pace quickening. The study door was gone. Panic began to claw at my throat. I spun around, my heart accelerating, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. Where was I? Each step felt like walking through treacle. I shivered, not just from the temperature, but from the sudden realization that the house itself was conspiring against me. A door materialized on my right, a heavy oak panel with a tarnished brass knob. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't one of the doors I knew in this section of the manor. I reached for the knob, my fingers numb. It turned with a soft click, too easy, too inviting. I pulled it open. Instead of a room, a narrow, winding staircase descended into absolute blackness. The smell of damp earth and something acrid, like burnt sugar, wafted up, making my stomach churn. This wasn't right. There was no such staircase here. The house was playing tricks, or I was. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the impossible. I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing unnaturally in the confined space. My breath hitched. It felt solid, real, yet everything around me contradicted that reality. I pushed off, determined to find my way back, to find a familiar path. I walked, my pace quickening, then breaking into a run, left, right, straight. Each turn brought me to another unfamiliar stretch of hallway, another door I didn't recognize, another dead end. Air grew stale, tasting of dust and decay, metallic on my tongue. The scent of wilting flowers intensified, now laced with something else, something sickly sweet and cloying. I remembered the floral perfume my wife used to wear, the one she loved, the one that now made my chest ache with a grief so profound it felt physical. The house was twisting even that, making it a weapon. I saw a flicker of movement at the end of a long, dark corridor. A silhouette, slender and familiar. Standing perfectly still, my wife. As I drew closer, the details began to emerge. Not her face, not her hair. It was a mannequin crudely dressed in one of her old nightgowns, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its painted eyes, just like the carousel horses, were wide and unseeing, and a faint, sweet smell of decay emanated from it. I stumbled back, a scream building in my chest, but refusing to escape. The house had pulled this from my memories, from my deepest wounds. It was marking me. I turned and ran, blindly, desperately, through what felt like an endless maze of shifting walls and silent, watchful doorways. My legs ached, my lungs burned. I didn't know how long I'd been running, how many turns I'd taken. Time had ceased to have meaning. Each corridor looked the same, each door a trap. My own fear was a raw taste in my mouth. I rounded a corner, my shoulders slamming into a solid wall that hadn't been there a second ago. I cried out, pain shooting through my arm. I collapsed to the floor, panting, my vision blurring. The room I was in was small, cramped, and utterly devoid of windows. The walls were lined with shelves, stacked with old, leather-bound books. My grandmother's study. I was back. I scrambled to my feet, my mind reeling. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm. But the room felt different, smaller. The shelves closer. The single lamp on the desk was still off, but now a faint, sickly green light pulsed from beneath the door leading to the main hallway. I reached for the door, my hand trembling, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was locked. I was trapped. How many times had I circled? How long had I been running? The phantom shriek of metal still tore through my skull, a resonance that vibrated behind my eyes. I tasted dust and damp air. Though I knew I lay on the threadbare carpet of my grandmother's study, the flickering gaslight casting long, dancing shadows. The image of the carousel horses, their painted eyes wide and unseeing, still writhed in my mind, their bodies twisting, cracking. I could almost feel the rough, peeling paint under my fingertips, the cold, greasy metal of their poles. My breath hitched. The study's familiar scent of stale paper and ancient dust began to shift, replaced by something metallic and acrid, like rust mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness. A distant groan, deep and mechanical, rumbled through the floorboards, silencing the gentle creak of the old house. My eyes, still gritty from sleep or shock, struggled to focus on the warped ceiling above. It wasn't the ceiling. It was an expanse of gray sky bruised with clouds. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy, protesting. The gaslight was gone. In its place, a sickly, diffused light struggled through the overcast sky. Study walls had dissolved. The air hung thick and still, tasting of damp earth and neglect. I was in the closed amusement park, pre-season inspection, rides creaking. The ground beneath my worn shoes was a patchwork of cracked asphalt and muddy puddles. To my left, the Ferris wheel stood like a skeletal sentinel, its rusted carriages swaying almost imperceptibly, groaning with each gust. To my right, the carousel. Its canopy, once vibrant, now hung in tattered strips of canvas, revealing the faded horses beneath. They were just as I remembered them from the vision, their painted eyes wide, unseeing, yet seeming to track my every move. They weren't writhing now, but the way their chipped wooden forms were angled, as if caught mid-twist, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I moved forward, drawn by a morbid curiosity I couldn't fight. The carousel horses looked different up close. Their painted smiles seemed stretched, their teeth too many, too sharp, almost visible beneath the peeling paint. I reached out, my fingers trembling, to touch the flank of a black stallion. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through it, as if something stirred just beneath the surface. Then I saw it. Tucked into the gap where the saddle met the horse's spine, almost camouflaged by the grime, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It was old, intricate, with a familiar, almost forgotten crest etched into its surface, the same crest I'd seen on some of the dusty ledgers in my grandmother's study. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I pried it open with a fingernail, the tiny hinge groaning. Inside, instead of a picture, was a miniature, brittle parchment folded countless times. My fingers fumbled, tearing it slightly as I unfolded it. The script was faded, spidery, but legible. It was a formal, archaic language, yet I understood it with a horrifying clarity. The Corail shall find its anchor in the inheritor, the one whose grief is deepest, whose spirit is most attuned to the resonance. Thus shall the pact be renewed, thus shall the balance be maintained. My breath caught in my throat, a painful gasp, gift of prosperity. That explained the manor, the family's strange, enduring wealth despite their reclusive nature. One of our own, every third generation. To serve as the vessel. My grandmother had been the last, and now, the one whose grief is deepest, whose spirit is most attuned to the resonance. My wife, her death, the crushing weight of my loss, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a prerequisite. A low hum began to emanate from the carousel itself, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to pass through the soles of my feet, up my legs, and into my very bones. The painted horses around me began to sway, not with the wind, but with an internal, sickening rhythm. Their unseeing eyes seemed to bore into me, no longer just paint and wood, but something else, something ancient and hungry. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, almost like blood, and the faint, sweet smell intensified, becoming sickly, cloying. I wasn't just a victim stumbling into a nightmare. I was the designated one, the chosen, the inheritor, the anchor. They hadn't just found me, they had called me. The hum intensified, filling my ears, vibrating through my teeth. The horses swayed faster. What did it mean to be the anchor? What did the Corail of Echoes do to its vessel? My ancestors made a deal with one horror to escape another. One of our own, every third generation. The words echoed, cold and clear, from the dusty journal clutched in my trembling hand. Not a gift, but a debt. And I was the next payment. A surge of desperate energy pulsed through me, cutting through the fog of grief and terror. I would not be another devoured memory. I would escape. The old sedan sat in the overgrown driveway, a relic almost as ancient as the house itself. The air outside was frigid, biting at my exposed skin as I fumbled with the gear stick. I pressed the accelerator, the tires spitting gravel, and sped away from the manor, the looming silhouette shrinking in my rearview mirror. For a moment, a fragile hope unfurled in my chest, a fleeting breath of freedom. The road, usually winding and familiar, seemed to stretch into an endless, featureless tunnel. Trees, black skeletal fingers, reached out from the encroaching forest, their branches scraping against the sky, too close, too many. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, a cloying sweetness, like stale cotton candy mingled with rust. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unsettling quiet of the landscape. Every turn seemed to lead to another identical stretch of road. The landmarks I remembered from my brief drives into the nearest town vanished, replaced by an unsettling, uniform wilderness. Then, through a sudden break in the dense, monotonous tree line, it appeared, an impossible vista, shimmering with an unholy, faded glamour. A closed amusement park, pre-season inspection, rides creaking. The sight punched the air from my lungs. The entrance gate, a grand arch of peeling paint, stood agape, revealing a tableau of silent, twisted metal and faded canvas. The Ferris wheel, a colossal, rusted skeleton, loomed against the sickly sky, its gondolas swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. A carousel, its painted horses chipped and eyeless, stood frozen mid-gallop. A metallic tang coated my tongue, a taste of fear. From within the park, a low, drawn-out groan echoed, then another. The rides creaking. Not just one, but many, a symphony of tortured metal and strained gears. The Ferris wheel began to turn, slowly at first, then gaining a deliberate, agonizing momentum, its massive structure groaning as if waking from a long slumber. Then the carousel joined, its rusty axis protesting with a high-pitched shriek. No power lines ran to the park. No lights illuminated the desolate grounds, yet they moved. My hand reached for the door handle, my fingers numb. I had to get out. Had to run, but where? The car felt like a trap, the park a grotesque hallucination. The creaking intensified, becoming a mocking, rhythmic chant. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it away, but the sound only grew louder, accompanied by a low vibration that thrummed through the car's chassis, through the very bones of my seat. My eyes snapped open. The world outside the car window had begun to warp. The faded colors of the park bled into the bruised sky, the lines of the rides blurring and stretching. The Ferris wheel's gondolas seemed to grow, their empty interiors gaping like hungry mouths. The ground outside twisted, the asphalt of the road rippling like disturbed water. Then a sudden immense pressure slammed into the side of the car, an unseen force that ripped the vehicle from the road. The world spun. I cried out, my head hitting the headrest with a sickening thud. The windows shattered inwards, showering me with icy shards, and the metallic smell of rust and decay became overpowering, thick and choking. I was no longer in the car. The sedan was gone, vanished, and I was airborne, tumbling through the sickeningly sweet, cold air. The ground rushed up, then away, then spun again. I tasted blood, hot and coppery on my tongue. The creaking of the rides was deafening now, a roaring gale that tore at my senses, pulling me, dragging me through the distorted landscape. My limbs flailed uselessly. My body was a puppet, jerked by invisible strings, my breath stolen by the violent, unseen currents. Pain flared in my shoulder, my ribs. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. Then, as abruptly as it began, the maelstrom ceased. I landed hard, sprawling on rough, familiar flagstones. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. My head throbbed, and a sticky warmth trickled down my temple. I pushed myself up, my vision swimming. The world still tilting precariously. The metallic tang of fear in my mouth was now mixed with dust and old wood. I was back in the grand foyer of the manor, the heavy oak doors shut tight behind me. The scent of dust and ancient must filled my nostrils, no trace of the sickening sweetness from the park. The silence was absolute, save for my own ragged gasps. I was bruised, battered, defeated. Had I ever left at all? The dusty journal slipped, its leather cover rasping against my clammy palm. One of our own, every third generation. The words echoed, cold and clear, not just from the page, but from somewhere deeper behind my eyes. My head swam. The manor walls, once solid, now seemed to breathe, the wallpaper patterns shifting into grotesque faces, their silent mouths agape. My ancestors made a deal, a gift of prosperity paid in minds, my mind. A tremor shook me not from fear, but from the ground itself. The floor beneath my feet wasn't the familiar warped oak of the manor study. It was gritty, cold, damp earth. I blinked, the flickering candlelight of the study replaced by a bruised, gray sky. Rusting metal skeletons pierced the gloom, silhouetted against the low clouds. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, stale sugar, and something acrid, ozone maybe, or just decay. My breath caught, tasting of metallic fear. I was standing on cracked asphalt, surrounded by the ghosts of laughter. The Ferris wheel, a colossal skeletal eye, groaned softly in the wind, each creak a complaint from ancient joints. Empty carriages swayed, clicking against the rusted frame. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. I had been in the study, hadn't I? The journal, the flickering candle. My fingers, still clenched around nothing, ached. The wind here, though, was real. It bit at my exposed skin, carrying with it the faint, sickly sweet scent of stale popcorn and something else, something cloying and rotten like forgotten dreams. A carousel, its painted horses chipped and peeling, stood frozen, their glass eyes staring blankly. One of them, a faded unicorn, leaned precariously, its horns snapped clean off. A lonely, mournful sound, a distant, distorted calliope tune drifted on the wind, almost inaudible, like a memory trying to surface. The entity, the chorale of echoes. It wasn't just the manor. It was everywhere, seeping into the cracks of my sanity, twisting what I saw, what I heard. It wanted to consume, not just my body the way I'd first thought. No, that was too simple, too crude. It wanted my mind. It wanted to anchor itself, not just in this reality, but in my reality, in my very consciousness, twisting my grief, my memories, into its own horrifying symphony. The journal entries, fragmented and desperate, began to coalesce in my shattered thoughts. A vessel, a song, a chorus of the lost. It wasn't a physical possession. It was a mental drowning. It wanted to become me, using my memories as its stage, my emotions as its instruments. The cyclone, a tangled mess of rusted steel, jolted. One of its empty cars, perched precariously at the top of a steep incline, slid forward an inch, then another, before catching with a shriek of metal. The sound scraped against my teeth. This wasn't just a hallucination. It was an active manifestation, pulling me deeper into its twisted playground. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of the park's groaning metal. I needed to fight. I needed to anchor myself, not it, but how. The journals. There was something, a detail, a specific object. I stumbled forward, my feet crunching on scattered gravel and bits of broken glass. The air grew heavier, pressing in on me, thick with the smell of damp earth and something indefinable, like old dust and forgotten screams. My throat was dry, each swallow a struggle. The distant calliope music grew louder, more insistent, a discordant melody that seemed to pluck at the strings of my own thoughts. It was trying to lull me, to draw me in, to surrender, but I wouldn't. Not like this. Not my wife's memory, not my own mind. The journal had spoken of a countermeasure, a specific sound, a specific material, a resonance against the chorus. It wasn't about banishing it. It was about disrupting its anchor, its hold on my mind. It was about creating a disharmony so profound it couldn't maintain its twisted symphony. A sacrifice, not of life, but of self, of memory, but in a controlled way. A specific memory, a specific grief, channeled through a physical medium. The solution was in the manor, locked away in a hidden compartment the journal described. A small tarnished silver locket, my wife's locket. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The locket she always wore, the one I still kept in the hidden compartment of my old desk back at the manor. It wasn't just an heirloom. It was a conduit, a focus, a weapon. The entity fed on fragmented grief, on echoes. But a focused, directed grief, channeled through something with deep emotional resonance, could be turned against it. It wasn't about letting go. It was about using the pain, using the memories, to cut the anchor. A gust of wind, sudden and violent, whipped through the park. The cyclone's car, the one that had shifted, plunged down the incline with a horrifying metallic roar, slamming into the bottom with a deafening crash. Sparks flew. The sound reverberated through the ground, through my bones. The calliope music shrieked, a cacophony of distorted notes. The Ferris wheel spun, faster and faster, its empty carriages blurring into a terrifying, silent wheel of fortune. It was here, in this twisted funhouse, or it was making this funhouse be here. I had to get back to the manor. I had to find that locket. The roar of the cyclone car faded, replaced by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate from the very air around me. It was a sound that promised oblivion, a chorus of echoes ready to consume. Could I truly turn my grief, my love, into a weapon?